Welcome to Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Line-Miller, your host. Thank you to our sponsor, Farm to Plate. They are bringing tomorrow's food business ecosystem to the market today. You can find out more at farmtoplate.io. On our podcast is really interesting. He comes at things from the financial perspective of the food business, and he's going to share all that with us. We have Peter Benat. He is the Chief Financial Officer with Bay State Milling. Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's exciting to have somebody who knows the food business as well as the numbers of the food business and what makes things work. So I'm really excited to bring your perspective, how you operate and what you look at and how you move forward. But let's back up for a second. Tell us a little bit about Bay State Milling.
Yeah, happy to. So I've been with Bay State Milling for a decade. It's been a wonderful 10 years. It's been a fascinating experience, and the company has a lot of history. Bay State Milling was founded in 1899. Our founder is the great-grandfather of the current shareholders, and he was an Irish immigrant who arrived in Boston, as many did in the 1890s, and he was looking for work on the port of Boston. They used to go and line up and be picked out of a lineup in order to find work and bring home money to feed their families. And he was hired by a grain merchant and became a grain runner port. And actually, their bookkeeper left the company, and Bernard learned how to do the books and became very fluent in the business from a broad standpoint. The company found that they had complaints from customers about the inconsistency in the quality of flour that they were exporting, and they decided they were going to make a better product. So they went back and looked for a flour mill because they wanted to control manufacturing, to control the quality. And the history of the company continues to be the same, where we're focused on making a better product. The founder statement is actually quite unique. He talks about people being willing to pay more for the gilt-edged article, something that is worth more, it's better, and therefore of higher quality, will always be of value to customers and to consumers. And that's really been Bay State Milling's approach as we've looked to be a specialized company, always looking to make the best quality and the best and most unique products. So we are in the flour business. Bay State Milling has about 5% of the market share for the overall flour business in the United States, but perhaps 30% of the organic flour business. And so we've gone into specialty ingredients and looked to do things that are unique. That has made us really on the forefront for a company of our size. We have done more recently, we've broken out into specific varieties, and we've gone into doing research and developed varieties that we actually have intellectual property protection on the genetics. And so part of our growth strategy is around bringing things that are, and they're non-GMO, but they are crossbred in a way that we actually have ownership of the genetics, and we've been developing for well over a decade some very, very unique products that are healthier for you and that are starting to make their way into consumer products as we bring our specialized ingredients to market.
Well, we'll get into some of the details of that in a few minutes. I really want to focus on the family-owned, the whole story of the starting of the company, and that the value, the extra value that initially, I don't know if that was a great-grandfather, lose track of the generations, right? Great, however many greats there are back to the 1890s, was bringing to the business. The reason that there was an original focus on the quality, the consistency, just the value that the flour was bringing to the community and what they were selling. I think it's great that that's still your mission statement today, that but they're willing to pay more for good quality, and especially when you get into some of the specialty flours. So I really appreciate that. You say 5%, like it's not a lot of the flour market, but that is a lot. That is a very large number here in the United States. But I really like that you've niched down and figured out, rather than being just a commodity, we can compete at that level. But what do we really want to focus on? What can we do really well and differentiate ourselves out in the market? And I guess that organic space is one that you've already broken out into. The 30% there, that's 30% of the 5%, I guess, or that's 30% of the entire organic market.
So 30% of them, or of the organic market.
Okay. Okay.
And so we're a major player when it's a specialty product. One of the things that we focus on is really having unique supply chains. And so with organic, you need to have strong relationships with the farmers. It goes backwards. Often for organic farmers, they actually want to have commitments many years in advance that you are going to be buying from them. And so having those trust-based relationships are critical. We may place an order for seed, for grain, organic grain, that hasn't been planted yet.
Oh,
we
wow.
often do that. So it's going to be delivered a year in advance, a year from now, or a year and a half, or sometimes even 2 years from now. We always want to have a surety of supply on the organics. And when we go into specialty grains and we start having those IP type where we control the seed, et cetera, we also need to make sure we have surety of supply, because otherwise the customers are not going to want to buy from you unless they're absolutely sure that you're going to be able to deliver in the quantities that they need.
Right. So that just strengthens your partnerships with the farmers and the growers that you are working with, because they really are your partner. You're depending on them to provide your product to your customers. So you have a strong partnership there, it sounds like.
So again, it depends. They're on the specialty side, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
On the conventional side, we're buying from grain exchanges.
Okay.
And the side of that business is actually fascinating, especially from the financial standpoint. We are selling a lot of our flour. So let's say a Pepperidge Farm or a Bimbo that owns Arnold, or a Flowers that owns Dave's Killer Bread or Wonder Bread. They're placing an order today, not for delivery next week, but for delivery 6 months from now. And these commodities are changing prices on the exchange every minute of every day. And so we're having to commit to a price that goes out 6 months into the future. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go onto the exchange and we're going to buy futures or lock in forward contracts. So we lock in our cost, we have a protected margin, and then we're able to assure delivery 6 months down the road to our customers. So that's coming off of a grain exchange. We're on what's more of what we refer to as a flat priced commodity, which is such as the organic flour that we're then going to produce. Then it's different because there's no exchange that we can buy it from. We buy it directly from farms.
I see. So the exchanges is maybe for a little bit higher volume.
So the exchange,
am I getting that right?
It's for commodities. So
commodities,
any commodity flour, we call it conventional versus organic versus our varietal specifics. The commodities are going to be really sold on exchange. There are 3 exchanges. There's one in Kansas City, which is for winter wheat. There is one in Minneapolis, which is spring wheat, and then soft wheat, which is more for cakes and pastries and cookies. That's sold on the Chicago exchange. So there are 3 separate exchanges in the United States that manage and handle, and they're all quoted both for spot and future markets.
Okay, well, thanks for explaining that to our audience as well, for those that might not be intricately involved in the exchanges that go on that you operate in. So let's move into some of the organic and maybe the specialty flours that you referred to, that you're looking where you actually own that intellectual property and the gene, I guess, combining that you've done. Explain that a little bit, what your goals are there.
So one of the big holes in the American diet, and there are enormous health benefits to fiber. Most fiber doesn't taste very good. If you look today for a high fiber bread or a high fiber tortilla, or you just take a fiber additive and pour it in, like was it Metamucil or whatever it is, and you stir it around, you'll drink it, but it is not, there's no pleasure in it. Fiber in most breads and tortillas are fiber additives, and so they are gritty and they don't bake very well. They interrupt the baking process when you're adding fiber additives into a flour that is a normal conventional flour. And so we've worked with a development partner that is a joint venture between a European and an Australian group. And we've worked with them for quite a number of years, bought the intellectual property for North America. A number of years ago, they handed us a bag of seed. So we started out with a bag of seed, and you don't know how it's going to grow. You don't know how it's going to bake, and you don't know how it's going to taste. So it was this cross high fiber, high amylose, and so it's a resistant starch. It's wonderful for health, for gut health, for your digestion. It's lower net carbs. It's for weight loss, very, very helpful and healthy, and has such a large number of health benefits. It's really, really good, healthy fiber, and they have crossbred it so it is inside the wheat kernel. So if you think about having like a whole wheat bread or a whole wheat tortilla or bread type product, it's a whole grain, and so the fiber you get from that is from the shell, and the shell is bitter. It doesn't have a good flavor profile. So if you kind of go to the supermarket and say, oh, I can get a wheat bread, whole wheat bread, or I can get a white bread. The white bread tastes good, but I'll get the wheat bread because it's healthy, it's better for me. You're not making the choice because you're going to get the pleasure of good taste, but because you feel guilty if you don't have the healthier.
That's true. We would normally choose the non-white bread because it's healthier. I don't think I've ever said, oh, this tastes so much better.
It's got a little bit of a cardboard taste to me. It's a little bit bitter, and it's because the shell of the wheat kernel itself, it is bitter. And so when you're grinding up that entire wheat kernel, you're taking it all, including the bitter part, and that's included when you are using a whole wheat flour in whatever product you're making. What has been developed, high amylose is now in the sweet part of the center of the wheat kernel. And so in that part of the wheat itself, you now have the fiber that is healthier for you in our unique product, and we call it HealthSense. So it's been branded as HealthSense, and it is the intersection of healthy for you and good tasting. So when you have a bread that is made with HealthSense, there are a few things that we've learned. One is it bakes really well. Oh. Why? Because the fiber is very water absorbing, and so it gives it a very, very good body. It's fairly high in protein, and it also turned out to have a phenomenal flavor profile. So we have pasta manufacturers who are starting to make pasta with it. And again, if you've ever had a whole wheat pasta, it's the same thing. You say, well, I'll eat it because I'm supposed to, not because I like it. But if you have a whole wheat pasta made with, rather a high fiber pasta made with HealthSense, it tastes as good, if not better, than a regular pasta. It is absolutely delicious. And it has a much better nutritional profile than whole wheat pasta. The same thing for a bread that might be made with HealthSense, and the same thing for a tortilla that might be made with HealthSense. It makes a fabulous pizza crust. Again, it has this very strong body, and it's delicious, and it's healthier for you. So we've really found what I consider a miracle ingredient, and it is the intersection of good for you and great tasting. You don't have to sacrifice taste at all when you are able to consume this. So it's still fairly new. As I said, we started out with a bag of seed, and then we had to plant it and grow it. So let's say we're planting an acre's worth of farmland, and then you have to harvest it. And now you've got to plant 16 acres, and then you plant, 16 times 16 acres, and so on and so forth, in order to build enough of a supply. And then you need to see where it grows. It doesn't always grow the same in each location. So we will grow it in different places. We grow it in the desert in Arizona. We grow it in the Pacific Northwest. We'll grow it in Montana and in North Dakota as well. And so we're, again, building up the supply chain and starting to introduce it into consumer products. And there are a few consumer products that now have HealthSense as one of their main ingredients, which is really exciting for us.
Well, it's really exciting for me because I'm thrilled to have, you also mentioned gut health, which is a big topic these days, that, what we put in our mouth really does. It is the nutrition profile for our bodies. So the better choices we can make the better outcomes we're going to have health wise. And you just hit on a few hot buttons for consumers these days, talking about, the higher fiber, always a struggle. And one of the reasons people don't eat a lot of bread these days is because they look at it as more simple carbs and they want to get more fiber in their diet. So you're answering a situation right there. Plus the taste, not having to use that bitter outside of the kernel, but being able to get to the sweet spot in the middle and have the nutritional profile be a part of that. So you have good taste that goes along with the high fiber and the other health benefits. I think it sounds like a great idea. And I want to know, I mean, is it available commercially? Like, could I go to the store and find it in a product? How would I know to look for it? How
So,
would I know how to do that?
so there are a number. There are some flours that you can get on the market. In the market, we actually launched our own. It's branded Flourish, like flour-ish. So Flourish flour. You can find it on Amazon. The one warning I give you is, as I mentioned, it's very water absorbent. And so whatever recipe you have, you need to add more water. Or
Okay.
if you're making pancakes and you use milk, you need to add more. Otherwise, it gets very, very thick because it absorbs the water. The fiber inside absorbs it, but it makes delicious pancakes and wonderful breads. And as I mentioned, a fabulous pizza dough. It's starting to get out there. It's slow. And what's interesting is we were starting to have a lot of interest, consumer products companies, right at the beginning of COVID. And when COVID hit, you may remember, there was no bread on the supermarket shelves.
I do remember. And flour, people started baking as well. Yeah.
You couldn't find flour. And one of the reasons with flour, which is interesting, it's not that there was a shortage of flour, it's that there was no ability to package in consumer size packaging. There weren't enough 1 pound, 2 pound bagging machines in the market. We could have given you flour, no problem. But that 50-pound bag really doesn't sit on the supermarket shelf that goes into major bakeries and bakery goods distributors. But what really happened was the mantra of the supermarkets at the time was, I need simple supply chain. I want to reduce the number of SKUs. Don't give me any new products. And so we were just starting to introduce it. And the supermarkets and the retail side said nothing new. We want simple supply chains. The fewer SKUs, the better. So we want SKU concentration, not SKU proliferation. And so it really set us back a couple of years in introducing HealthSense and the products into consumer products in the marketplace. Now it's starting to grow again. And we're very excited about the potential for the future.
Yeah, and the challenge that you had with moving from a more commercial size packaging to a consumer size packaging was not just in your industry. That's exactly what happened with toilet paper, for example. There was a ton of commercially packaged toilet paper, but just overnight flipped that to be able to package it for consumer. The grocery store, it's different how they do that. The quality is different, and you're familiar with all of that. But your quality isn't any different, but certainly how you package it, and you can't just switch those machines over.
So we look at the marketplace and think about it as at-home consumption and away-from-home consumption. So restaurants, food service, bakeries, etc., would be away from home. We were very set up to support the away from home marketplace. A lot of our product goes to manufacturers, or it goes to bakery distributors or food service companies. We were not set up when everything shifted because people weren't eating out anymore. People weren't going to work and having the food service in the office cafeteria anymore. They were working mostly from home. Even the whole school lunches, everything changed as people were now at home and consuming everything for at-home consumption out of a supermarket. And the supply chain just could not move fast enough. And that's why there were empty shelves. That way it was so hard to find certain products. And it wasn't because core behind it was not available, but to be able to put it into the packaging and the size for consumption in supermarkets just was not set up appropriately.
For the right customer. So did you make that transition, or did you just leave things where they kind of wait it out?
Really, we are not a sell to company. We sell, it's B2B. Most of what we sell goes out in truckloads. It may be a bulk truck that gets weighed as it comes into the factory. It's empty, it gets weighed. Then it goes under a tunnel. It gets filled with flour coming in through a big hose, fills up the truck. You weigh it on the way out. That's the number of pounds that, by difference that it gets shipped, or it's pallets of 50-pound bags that are being put into a truck and then being shipped out. So we're just not set up for consumer. When we launched Flourish, which was the HealthSense consumer flour, we had to go to another manufacturer. We had to mill the flour in our Arizona plant and then ship it to Utah, I think it was, where they would then put it in 2-pound and 5-pound bags and be available for commercial production. And that makes it more expensive because you had to do extra transportation in order to move it, et cetera. So
extra, and the whole supply chain piece of what happens on the back end, I don't think people think about that as much, of what really has to happen to get product to them in whatever form it is. I mean, you just went through some of the decisions that need to be made as a company, and as you're tracking and tracing, and customers want to know, well, where did my flour come from? Well, it was here, but then we had to package it here, and then it's still the same flour, but it's just what you need to go through to get it in the form where you can sell it to them. Just keeping up with all of that, and like you said, the trucking that happens and what's going on with the environmental conditions and all the different variables that go into this business. It sounds simple. It's not simple.
I studied economics when I went to college. So I'm, degree in economics, and I've used some of it throughout all of my career, but never as much as I've used it in this commodity-based agricultural business. Economics 101 talks about supply and demand, and prices get set based on supply and demand, and it is in its raw form any agricultural commodity-based product. As the price of wheat goes up and corn goes down, the farmer knows that they're going to make more money planting wheat, so they're going to convert more acres to produce wheat than they would, whatever the other commodity was that they were producing before, corn, soybean, whatever it was. And so the whole shift of supply and demand and climate change is having an impact. So when we look at the cost of food going up, part of it has been its cost of climate is not obvious to most, but it does impact growing farm. 2 years ago, we had a severe drought in Canada, and we have an oat facility in Canada. It's a specialty oat manufacturer, and we process a unique supply chain that is what's called Purity Protocol gluten-free oats. Oats do not contain gluten naturally, but if you have a crop rotation where you have wheat or barley produced on the same land on one rotation and then oats on the next, there will be cross-contamination of gluten. If you are shipping wheat in the truck today and oats in the truck tomorrow, there's cross-contamination of gluten. And so we actually have a closed supply chain. We have farmers that will only plant non-gluten containing crops in their rotation. They have to go through that for 3 years in order to be certified as certified gluten-free. All of the transportation equipment can only do non-gluten containing, and it's a purity protocol process that we have in our plant in Canada. So
good to know. That is really good to know. I don't think, again, people don't really think about the gluten-free. It says gluten-free or not. And I only ever thought about like the manufacturing plant or the packaging, that there was no cross-contamination, but I hadn't thought about the actual ground that the oats are grown in having cross-contamination. I have not heard that before.
So there are several different levels of gluten-free, and the one that we use in this plant is actually called Purity Protocol. And it's the protocol that has been put in place to be purely gluten-free all the way down the supply chain. And I think the measurement is down to less than 5 parts per million of gluten in the specification. So it's very, very clean from that standpoint. There are
Mhm.
other things that are called gluten-free that can be 10 parts per million or 20 parts per million. Anything over 20 parts per million is not considered gluten-free. And
Got
there are
it.
different ways others do it. They can do mechanical sorting, but it won't be quite as consistent as our process, and it won't get down to the 5 parts per million spec. So a couple of years ago, severe drought hits, access to oats, what happens to prices? Cost of oats shoots up. It's all supply and demand. The following year, it was one of the most robust oat growing crops in the history of Canada. So the price comes way, way down. This
Wow.
year, they're having difficulty with the crop, and so the price goes back up. In terms of wheat, the wheat crop has been affected by climate change. There have been drought areas throughout the country in wheat growing territory, and it's driven the price up. Russia declares war on Ukraine. Immediately, because it's a global commodity, the price of wheat goes up by an extra $2 a bushel. It went from about $9 to $11. Throughout the time of the war, in the first few months, it actually climbed from 11 to 12 to 13 to 14. So the price of a loaf of bread goes up directly when that cost goes up. It's since come down. It's now probably in the $7.50 bushel range when it had been as high as 14. But somehow the price of bread takes longer to come down than it took to go up, which is the normal that happens in a supply chain and in our lives. So,
and because there's also lead time in there, and yeah, I mean, I understand all that. And there are some other costs that are involved in the price of a loaf of bread that aren't necessarily just the source material. You've got all the transportation, logistics, that whole supply chain situation that you were talking about, and manufacturing mills are running and what aren't, variables again.
Absolutely. So most grain is moved in rail cars, and we will buy 25 carloads of grain at a time. And we have some smaller mills, very large mills with much more storage capacity that actually will bring in 110 rail car trains onto their site and be buying them all at the same time. The cost of transportation starts to be a very big piece of the cost of any food. We're moving it around the country in a lot of different ways. And so most of our customers, it will be a manufacturing facility or a distributor. It's within a 100-mile radius of one of our plants. And the reason is it starts to become very expensive. Truck flour beyond 100-mile radius, it adds to the cost, and it adds to the cost of the food on the grocery shelves as well.
Well, and that's why you have things spread out. You mentioned you've got locations all across the states and then Canada as well. And that really makes sense for North America, that you would have some diversity, not only of your growing, but then also of your processing. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so flour mills tend to either be origin mills, so they're very close to the wheat farms and where the wheat is grown. North Dakota Mill and Elevator is a big flour company, and it's one of the largest mills in the country, and it is based very close to the source. Most of our mills are what we call destination mills. North Dakota Mill and Elevator, for example, they will process the flour in North Dakota, and then they will ship rail cars out flour itself. We ship rail cars of grain and wheat. We will produce the flour, whether we're putting it in bags or selling it in bulk trucks. Then it's going to be sent to someone fairly local within that 100-mile radius or less.
Yep, just a different way of doing business and how you've decided is best for you and your customers and your volumes. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong. It just works for you.
Again, it's really based on the cost of transportation, whether you're transporting grain or but you don't want to ship in trucks a long distance. It's just very, very expensive when you do that.
Good to know. Well, Peter, what else should we know about Bay State milling? Or we've kind of gotten into a very general conversation about wheat and oats and organic. Do you have any other specialty flours that you're working on that you'd like to share with us?
So before we go into specialty flours, we actually have another proprietary ingredient. It is a unique form of oat that was developed in Montana, and we bought the license and bought the intellectual property to. It's a fabulous. An oat has a hull, and normally you are taking the hull, you're shipping the hull, and inside the hull is a groat which is the good part of the oat itself. Going to the plant, you have to remove the hulls to go through a dehulling process. Then you are using the groat. You may flake it, you may grind it into flour, you might do steel cut, many different things that you would be familiar with in consumption of oats. We have a unique oat that has two special characteristics. It actually sheds its hull as it grows. And so we call it a naked oat.
Okay.
And so the advantage is you save a lot of energy. It's got a better carbon footprint. You're not shipping hulls to throw them out.
And you don't have to strip it off. Yeah.
You don't have to use energy to strip it off, etc. It's also very high in protein. Bob's Red Mill has just launched high protein oatmeal. We're very excited about it, and it also uses our proprietary ingredient. We have, in this case, of course, direct relationship with all the farmers that are growing it. It's all grown in North Dakota and in Montana. We manage that supply chain very, very closely with an intimate relationship with the farmers themselves. We process it in Montana, and then we have a facility in California that will go and flake it and so forth, or grind it into flour. One of the areas that's also interesting that's been a very, very big growth, and we are looking to tap into, is what's called dairy analog, oat milks, and then all the derivatives of oat milks, whether it's a yogurt or an ice cream or any other creams, etc.
Yep.
Which is, of course, it's gluten-free. It's got a creamier taste. If you've had almond milk, for example, oat milk will have a creamier taste and flavor to it, and it's become very, very popular. Yeah. So we getting more into the oat side of the business. This So Naked oat that we have, and with its high protein characteristic, really nice potential for a very special product that does very, very well in a consumer product as well.
Nice. Thanks for telling us about that. That sounds exciting.
So we also have a broad array of specialty ingredients. We do a lot of gluten-free flours. We will do rice flours. We make flours with ancient grains, with millet, for example, that is gluten-free. We have, part of our business is specialty edible seeds. We have managed supply chains for chia and quinoa and sesame. We do sweet spices like cinnamon, chickpea flours. So there are chickpea pastas that are on the marketplace. Banza is the big pasta manufacturer that is a customer of ours, where we are managing the supply chain and then bringing in the product as well. So it's been a broad array, and it goes back to our founder statement. We want to do things that are special. We want to make a better quality. We want to make the gilt-edged article. And the gilt-edged article includes a high-fiber, healthier for you wheat that also makes a phenomenal flour and a phenomenal product in the finished good. The high protein that is better for the environment on the oat side. The gluten-free supply chain that very few people can match. We try to be special. We are gilt-edged. And it's really been the history of Bay State Milling to focus on the consumer and the customer, making the best product that we can in order to satisfy the needs of the marketplace from that standpoint.
Yeah, I'm so happy to bring your story to our listeners and what your company is doing. And I hope they check out your products and take a look at your website. Links are in the comments of the episode. And if you liked this type of interview, taking a deep dive into this business, I think it was really a lot of fun, very educational. I hope you enjoyed it, listeners. Please let us know. Leave us some comments. Subscribe to our podcast. Let us know what other kind of guests you would like for us to have. Until next time, I'm Pam Line-Miller. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.